your patients. The presentation today is a repeat of one that we presented previously. However, we have had a large number of people request that it be done again. So that's why we're presenting it again today. Just a reminder that you do not have to wait until the end of the presentation. If you have a question, feel free at any time to jump in. And also the questions do not have to be pertaining to what we're discussing. In this forum, you can bring any question you might have, and we'll be happy to talk about it and kick it around and see if we can give you some ideas. Okay, I am Chair Cliss. I am one of the directors, the QA/QI director at the clinical trials, the CTSI Clinical Trials Office, and I'm going to be your presenter today. So today we're going to talk about source documents, and source documents serve a very important purpose in a clinical trial. It's the way to keep track and to reconstruct the trial exactly as it has happened. It should be able to allow anyone that comes in, whether it's from the FDA or a monitor or another coordinator, to be able to look at your source documents and know what it is that happened during this study. It's also extremely important to have this documentation for the FDA. None of us want to have a 483 letter. And when you're doing your source document, it is the beginning of a clean, verifiable audit. So you want to, right away, first visit, start taking your notes. Okay, source documents can be a number of different things. They can be, they do want them to be original documents, but they can be data or records or certified copies of clinical findings, observations, clinic visits, lab tests, X-ray results. Any of that can be a source document. And the investigator is required to prepare and maintain the adequate, accurate case histories that record all observations and treatment during the study. However, most of the time it is up to the coordinators to complete these forms. Your source documents can be either paper or electronically, or it can be a combination of both. And you could also keep this in Florence, which moving forward, I believe is the way that people want to start moving. So what exactly is it that you want to capture? You want to capture the consent. Not only having the patient sign the form, but you want to capture how they signed the form, what happened when they signed the form, and how you obtained it. For example, were you in the clinic? Were you in an office? Was there anyone present? Was the patient in the hospital? Did the patient have any questions, and did they understand what you were asking them? You also want to be able to prove the patient was eligible for the study. So you want to have a statement of the inclusion/exclusion review. You also want to document your study procedures, your intervention, also the adverse events and drug accountability. You want to keep track of the study drug that you're giving to the subjects. You also want to keep track of specimen collection, handling, and storage. Do you have that, PK sample? Are you taking your lab to send to the central lab? You want to document all of that. You also want to keep progress notes. Okay, I mentioned a couple of examples that could be source documents, and here is a list of others. Again, they could be laboratory notes, they could be memos, it could be a subject's diary, or it could be a subject's email. It could be photographs, it could be X-rays, it could be a phone call from the patient that you document. Again, all of these things are considered to be source documents. Okay, electronic source document. Pretty sure all of us know what this is. It's a combination of text, graphic, data, audio, pictorial, and other information in digital form that is either created, maintained, archived, retrieved, or distributed by a computer system. The electronic source documentation requirements for 21 CRF Part 11, there has to be validation of the computer system, an audit system for electronic records, electronic signatures, user and technical support, and fortunately, Epic has taken care of all these requirements. If you are using electronic medical records for your source and you're not printing out the document, which again, you don't need to do, and you're not saving it someplace, it is, advised, it's not necessary, but advised that you make a note on your source documents for that visit where you found that note, so that when you're being monitored or someone comes in wanting to look, at your source document, you can take them right to that the information in the EMR. Okay, so physical exams. If physical exams are documented in the electronic medical records and not on paper, then that is the source document. This can be printed and added to the source chart, or can be viewed in the EMR. Pretty much just stating what I actually just said. You can take information from the EMR and use that for your source documents. If the patient did not have a physical exam before being looked at for the study, then you would have to have a physical exam worksheet, or have the physician perform the physical exam and capture it in Epic. And when you're looking at your physical exam source doc, you want to make sure that all of the body systems that are in the protocol will match the case report form. Okay, paper source documentation can be pre-printed forms prepared for study visit by the sponsor, rarely, or created by study team, usually. They can be handwritten records, and paper source documents should have the original signature of the person collecting the data on the form. And again, if you are, talking to the subject and you're in a room and all you can find is a napkin and you write information on that napkin, that is now your source document. If you're with the patient and you can't find any paper and you write on your hand, obviously your hand is not your source documentation. You don't want to leave it someplace, but you can take a picture of it and use that for your source documentation. And this is an example of a physical exam. It isn't one that was prepared by the sponsor, but it is one that was prepared taking what the sponsor wanted in their electronic data capture form. And a template was made to capture everything that the everything the sponsor wanted, and all of our information can be on here. And we do have examples of these if anyone's interested. Okay, it could be a paper source worksheet. You could have a sheet where you write down all the vitals. You write down, the blood pressure, if there's 1, 2, or 3. You write down the heart rate, the respiratory rate. You write all of that down. If you should make a mistake, you one line through it, initial, date, write the correct number. You do not want to scribble on it and say, oh, I'll take care of this later. I'll rewrite it later. No, this will be your source.
Was the last one and this one part of the handouts, those examples?
It was a physical exam template.
Okay, so that was in the handouts for the.
Oh, I'm sorry, the physical exam paper?
Is that one in the handouts for today?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to remind people there are examples and templates in the box link that you got yesterday. You'll get another email today as well with the box link, so those could be found in there along with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is just an example of a worksheet. Okay, the informed consent documentation. We are having a informed consent workshop next week.
Next Wednesday.
So I'm just going to briefly go over this, what you need to capture for your informed consent documentation. Not only will you have your consent document that the patient has looked at and signed, what we want to talk about right now is the source document that describes how the consent was obtained. Again, as I mentioned earlier, were you in the patient's hospital room? Was there someone else available to talk to? Did the patient want you to leave the consent form and come back? What questions did they have? Anything that happened during that visit to document the consent, you want to capture that. And again, this can be on paper or it can be as part of a visit note. And this is just a simple example of things that could be asked during the informed consent documentation. Was it obtained? The date of it, the time, who was it obtained by? Was a copy given to the subject? Again, just a very short list of questions that need to be answered. And this one I do feel is one of the most important documentations. This is for the inclusion exclusion criteria. Quite often, if there's going to be 483 warnings from the FDA, it's going to be because the patients were not eligible for the study. So you want to make sure that you are looking at all of the inclusion exclusion criteria, that you have documentation for it. And also, before the patient is enrolled in the study, you should have the PI review and either approve or say, no, the subject is not eligible. Again, you want to have that documented, especially if it is a interventional trial. And again, just example of what could be at the bottom of an inclusion exclusion criteria documentation is that the PI has signed it and dated it. Okay, and source document worksheets. Again, many study teams develop specific worksheets for each study to include all of the procedures that need to be performed. And that is great. And a lot of times, if you make one template, you can just use them for all of your other studies and not have to, recreate the wheel each time. However, when you are making your worksheets, if that's the way you're going to go, you want to be sure that you have the subject identifiers on every page, the protocol visit number and date of the visit. You want to check the subject's date prior to the initiation of any study procedure. What does that mean? How are they feeling? What is their blood pressure? What is their temperature? Those types of things. You want to document if you gave them medication, if they took their medication, if they didn't take their medication. And if they did not take the medication, ask them why. Reasons I have heard have been knocked it into the sink and it went down the garbage disposal, left it in the car and it melted, dropped it on the floor and the dog ate it. So we have had a number of different reasons why they did not take their medication. You also want to make a list of the adverse events that may have occurred since the patient signed the consent form. And this can be, again, the patient does not have to have received the medication before you start capturing adverse events. It's from the time they sign the consent form. You also want to put the results of any study-specific evaluations. For example, if the PI did a physical exam, you want to have their documentation in there. If you were working with the TRU and they had paper documentation of what they did, you want to get a copy of that. And also any lab results or MRI results, anything like that, you want to make sure you have a copy of, again, either electronically in Florence, in the EMR, or in a study binder if you keep paper. And then you also want to, at the time of termination of the study, you want to make sure to note the patient's status. Are they alive? Are they, are they deceased? Are they feeling better? Are they feeling worse? And if they terminate before the study ends, you also want to capture all of that information. And again, be as thorough as possible. Because I can tell you that 4 or 5 years down the road, when you go back and try to read what you wrote, you're not going to understand it. Okay, I'm assuming that most of you are aware of the GCP guidelines, and one of those is the correction if you're going to make on a source document. Again, you make a single line through the original entry, initial, and date with the current date. Do not backdate. You don't want to scribble over any mistakes. You don't ever want to use whiteout or tape. Again, don't rewrite over the top of the entry. And that is the one that I find that most of the PIs will do. They'll just try to correct it by writing over it. You do not want to destroy the originals. And you also don't want to alter your past dated notes. You don't want to, add something alongside of it or adding it prior to the entries. Missing data that located at a later date, you want to incorporate into the research record with current date. Again, do not backdate. You don't want to ignore it. And again, you don't want to backdate that information. All labs, tests, and imaging results are to be printed and viewed by the PI, signed and dated as required by sponsor. Again, if you're keeping them electronically or in Florence, They do not have to be printed. However, you should have a system for documentation from the PI that he has reviewed them. And templates can be made in Florence for this. And then if the subject does have abnormal results, the PI needs to look at these and determine if they are clinically significant or not clinically significant. And that has to be documented very clearly, whether or not it is. And if it is clinically significant, is it an AE? And some of the common issues that are noted is that the source document or the data is unavailable. And you're being audited by the FDA and they're asking you where this information is. Why is this information in the EDC? And you're saying that because that's what it was at that time. They want you to prove it. Or it's incomplete, the source document. The results of the study-related procedures are not documented. The investigator or the designee did not sign or date the form as required. And adverse events recorded in the progress notes were not reported in the study data. And also, if there's a discrepancy between the source documents and the ECRFs, there will be not happy with the FDA audit. Again, with the implementation of Florence, there are some things that are going to be changing. If your study is using Florence and going forward, that is the way we hope all the studies are being stored. You can make templates in Florence to capture different things. You would go into your individual participant folders and then duplicate your template from either the sponsor source, or again, you can rewrite one of your own. And then you can, within visits and worksheets and documentation, you can upload your source documents to that file, and you can certify the document, which you can do in Florence. Okay, when you are completing your source document, you want to make sure that you are following ALCOA-C, and what that is, A is attributable. That means the data generated or collected is traceable back to the individual who generated the information, whether it was the coordinator, whether it was the principal investigator, whether it was a floor nurse or an attending physician. They have to be able to find out, where did this document come from? Fortunately, Epic does that for us. It has to be legible. The data recorded must be readable and permanent. Scribbling doesn't really work, so make sure that the information can be read. If your PI has a habit of scribbling information, be sure to have him or her write out exactly what it is and very clearly. It has to be contemporaneous. It needs to be at the time it was done. You're going to measure that data. You're not going to measure the data from a year ago for lab results that you need. You're going to do it at the time it was performed. Okay, it has to be original. It has to be created or resulted for the first time when it actually happened. That is considered your original source. Previously, I mentioned using a napkin. If that is your source, yes, that is your original source, and you can find a way to capture that inside, or to hang on to that either by picture or in a plastic bag or something to hold on to that. Yes, it has happened. Also, it has to be accurate, that there are no errors or corrections without it being documented why there were corrections. And then the plus for ALCOA Plus stands for complete, consistent, enduring, and most importantly, available. And some good documentation tips. Every study visit and conversation with the subject should be documented in the clinical study or source file. One issue that I've seen coming up lately is communicating with subjects via your cell phone or via text. And you want to make sure that you have a way to capture these conversations, whether it's screenshots, however, but you need to make sure that those are captured. All documentation should be completed in black or blue ink. I really want to take the blue ink out of there, but I'm told that I can't because it can be blue, but I like black. Whiteout should never, ever be used. In the clinical trials office, we don't even order any whiteout tape. It's just not used. All the emails or faxes sent to the site regarding the subject should be printed and filed in the clinic or the study binder or a source file. And all the documents, again, should be Alcoa C compliant. Corrections following GCP, a single line through the error, adding your initials and date, and noting the corrected information, and also initialing that. Electronic case report forms. I really don't know of many studies that still use paper report forms. But what is a case report form? It is a printed, again, very seldom, or electronic document or database that's designed to record all of the protocol required information to be reported to the sponsor at each trial. It's provided by the sponsor, either in paper, again, not often, or an electronic system. Must be checked against the source document by the sponsor monitor. When they come in, anything that you put on the or put into the electronic database, they want to look at it to make sure it's correct. Some of the times your case report form will even give you information that needs to be collected that was not in the protocol. You might find questions, is the subject a smoker? How long have they smoked? But that's not in the protocol. And you can then adjust your source documents accordingly. Okay, the purpose of the CRFs, again, is to capture all the protocol required information. It is to facilitate the data collection and entry. It benefits data management and statistical analysis, promotes data sharing between study team and other institutions. And the data collected is outlined, or the data that's to be collected is outlined in the protocol, and they want to avoid duplication of data. In a perfect world, the sponsor would follow all of these. They would be simple, easy to understand. They wouldn't duplicate information. However, some databases, electronic case forms can be difficult to complete. Sometimes there are a lot of queries that are issued when you put information in. One thing to remember is that usually data management at the company are not medical people. So even if you have something in there that looks, to you, that why should I answer this? It's obvious. It's going to be queried. They're going to want you to answer it. Okay, case report forms as source documents. You are now allowed to use case report forms as source documents. Therefore, the CRF now has two functions: part of the medical record, first port of entry, and your data collection tool. When CFRs or CRFs or portions of CRFs service source documents, you want to make sure that the protocol prospectively defines which data may be treated in this way. And the sections of the CRF also functioning as source documents should be signed and dated by the person collecting that information. Okay, so a little discussion, and some of these I may have already talked with you. But let's go to number 3. The subject brought back her drug dosing diary, but she spilled coffee on it, and she would like a new diary to fill out. What would you do? What would be the appropriate response to this? Anyone? Okay, no, she would not be allowed to complete a new one, even with the coffee spilled, the coffee stain. You would still collect that diary. Okay, and then number 4, the subject's ECG resulted as abnormal. The PI reviewed it, the printout, and signed it. And what is missing from this?
If it's clinically significant.
Right, whether or not it's clinically significant, whether or not it's abnormal, and if it is clinically significant, is it an AE? And your subject presents for the visit with a strange looking rash on her back. You're not quite sure how to describe it. I mean, it could be, pustules, it could be bumps. How would you describe this? How would you document what it looks like? One way that you could document this is to take a picture of the rash and use that as your documentation.
have a question.
Yeah.
For number 3, if they were not finished with a diary, but they wanted a new one, you still would make them use the old one with the coffee stain, or would you provide them a new one?
Still have them use the old one, or you can provide them with a new one, but don't have them transfer the information.
Right,
Right.
okay,
The information that's on the old form, that stays on there.
yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, again, we briefly talked about queries. Again, there's going to be, it's a conversation between the monitor, the study team, and the data management. Queries are persistent. They won't go away until the data is corrected or the discrepancy is explained. And sometimes you do have to, be somewhat forceful with your monitor or with your the data management for some that just cannot be answered. Also, queries, hopefully they prevent major issues at the end of data collection by catching mistakes during the process. And believe it or not, queries are our friends. Okay, and again, the source data and ECRF must match. If someone's coming in to look at the information that you collected, you need to have documentation of it. One of the most found discrepancy that I have found looking at FDA 483 letters are made up patients, where they'll enter data for a patient and not have anything to back it up. And further review, indicates that the patient actually did not exist. They were just writing the information down on their source documents. So does anyone have any questions or would like to add anything?
I have a question about the queries. Is that
Sure.
a separate like software company or is that built in for
Yeah,
us? Like,
yeah,
what is-
queries are like, for example, for your electronic EDC, they'll issue queries within your electronic data capturing system. So there's a bunch of different ones. Metadata Rave is very popular. I don't know, that's the only one I've ever
Okay.
used in different forms. And so the sponsor will give you access to that and everything will be already pre-built by the sponsor and for that study. So you feel like you're double entering information sometimes because you have your source documents in the EDC
Right.
and you're going back and forth. But a lot of issues do come up, as Shar said, with the queries where they'll just start issuing you queries. Like, for example, like if I said like a patient taking Tylenol, they'll be like, please correct to acetaminophen.
Right.
It's like, okay,
Gotcha.
sometimes they're like silly things like that. Or it is like, especially like clarifications for like AEs, SAEs. If a patient's had to be unblinded for any reason, it's, walks the patient through completely. But that's where they will issue you those.
Gotcha.
Right, and a lot of times it might be that the subject's blood pressure is out of boundary for what they're looking for, and then they'll question you, is this correct?
Yeah, sometimes there's automated triggers in there too. Also for lab examples, for instance, like if a CBC is what sponsor defines as out of range, it will automatically query you, but per like Freighter guidelines, that CBC is within our normal lab range. So then you have to be like, no, per local.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of sometimes repetitive data entry.
And I don't know if anyone else has ever had this happen, but about 5 years ago, no longer than about 10 years ago, we were using a certain ECRF, database, and it was really quite easy. However, about halfway through a 7-year study, they changed companies for their electronic capture forms. And the new company actually wanted us to go back 3.5 years to capture information that wasn't captured with the old database. And that was extremely difficult to do. Fortunately, we were able to get a bit of money from the sponsor to do this, but that is one thing that was very disturbing.
Carolyn has a question. You can feel free to unmute yourself or type it in the chat.
Hey, for that 5th example that you had back there as a question with the rash, and you suggested taking a picture. I know clinically there are special permissions you have to get in order to take pictures of patients. Is that something that would have to be like IRB approved separately?
That is a very good question, Carolyn. I think we should look into that.
Yeah,
I
we
mean,
should
we're
look
not
into that,
capturing
Carolyn, 'cause I don't-
patients'
Yeah, so if it's happening, I guess it'd be different. I don't know about IRB oversight for that, Carolyn. That's a great question for the IRB. However, if it's like I'm just thinking what I would do in that situation if like I was in like a research, like the True, for example, with my patient in a separate exam room. If your PI is there, whoever is like your, the person signed off to medically examine the patient is there, I would have them document it and maybe try and have an informed conversation about taking a picture if the patient's okay with that. And put that in your source document if you're evaluating for a potential AE and you don't have time to go to the IRB and say, hey, can I take this patient's picture of the rash or not? If your PI is not there and you're taking a picture maybe because it wasn't an event where your PI or whoever has medical oversight was supposed to be at the visit, I would probably still have the same conversation. But I think, going forward, we can at least ask the IRB what they say.
Right, well, I think that is a good question, and I will follow up with the IRB and give the information to Sarah, who can then
Yeah.
distribute it to the group. It is a very good question, and it also leads me to think that if in your protocol, if a rash is listed as one of the side effects, should that be included in your original submission?
Yeah. Potential to take a picture.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Anybody's welcome to unmute or type in the chat also.
It's not easy.
Well, if no one has a question, I actually have a question. I recently have been asked by some people to find out some information as to why some studies have been canceled or they've been withdrawn, that we haven't moved forward with them because of a delay in getting them approved. Looking at these, it's not one thing that is causing it. It could be the sponsor not getting back to us. It could be the IRB not having queued it in an appropriate time. It could be the coordinator who is just, too busy to do things or neglects to submit certain items or to complete the form. Recently that I know of, we've had 4 studies that did not move forward because of how long it was going to take to get it approved. Or it had been sitting there for 6 months, hadn't been approved. However, in that case, it was the sponsor who wasn't getting back to us. And so I was just wondering, has anyone else experienced that? No.
Sorry, this is Carolyn again. I have one that you're probably not including in those 4 that will probably end up being a 5th.
Please share.
It is a lot of back and forth with the IRB on patient confidentiality issues that apparently have not been problematic for this nationwide study's other sites.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Any other information or questions?
We also welcome questions.
Hey, Char, it's Caleb. I have a question for you.
Sure.
You know how much fun I have on Dream in all our queries. Where do you like to draw the line between like a query on fixing a mistyped set of vitals versus a query where they want you to delete an SAE and refile something as device deficiency in terms of like involving the PI and making a big stink over a query? Like, where's the line in your opinion?
Again, another good question. And it really does change, case by case. I would, take a look at it. Sometimes there is, an SAE that you've entered that does have to be changed, because when you're looking at it, yes, they're right. The SAE should have been this and not, this. However, if the PI is, very firm that no, this is the serious adverse event, this is it. There is pushback that you do with the monitor and your the data management team. So again, it's case by case. I would take a look at it. Sometimes it's very simple. I mean, if they're asking you, 4 times to correct the vitals, but you have them correct all the time, then, yeah, you're not gonna keep changing that.
That
But you
makes
can-
sense.
Yeah, you can push back.
Mhm.
I mean, I've used the phrase, query is not appropriate many times. Any other questions or comments? You'll also be aware that we're always looking for ideas for these enrichment sessions. So if you have an idea, something you would like us to discuss or you would like to hear about, please let Sarah know. And we would certainly do our best to get those set up. We do have previous sessions on recordings. And Sarah, I believe you sent out the link for that.
All of our previous session recordings are actually just directly on our website. If you scroll to the bottom, they're all in date order. Clickable at YouTube link, so you don't need a password or anything like that.
Right. And if you have a question about one of the previous sessions, please feel free to reach out also. Again, this is a very informal setting. It is basically created just for for us to get together and share some information. There is a presentation so that we do have a topic to talk about. But again, it does not have to stay on topic. It can be a discussion of any issues or problems or concerns that you may have or suggestions.
Nothing else in the chat. All right, we'll conclude the session then. I hope everybody has a great day.
So
Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you.